Welcome back to Class Time, your daily classroom for CSEC and CAPE subjects. Today we'll be discussing CSEC English literature, and our topic will concentrate on the writer's craft, figurative language, and narrative techniques, specifically looking at how they're used in literature. I am Vanessa Francis. So our objectives for today are as follows. So you should be able to define the key terms, of course. You should be able to describe the relationship between figurative language and narrative technique. You should also be able to discuss how to comment on various writers' use of figurative language in selected short stories. Keep in mind that for the exam, the last question in the essay section, the last section of the question, usually requires you to use this type of knowledge in order to develop your points more. So we're looking at narrative technique first. The first thing you need to know is that it is a compilation of the methods that writers use to tell their stories, methods and devices. It's a strategy used to relay information to the audience, and it also provides deeper meaning for the reader and helps the reader to use the imagination to visualize situations. What does all of that really mean? Basically, it's the writer's way of being very creative. It's the writer's way of giving you impressions through the use of their words. So, of course, we need to look at the elements of the narrative technique. And there are four major ones that will always come up. So you have the point of view. You have the use of dialogue. You have the use of time or time shifts. And you have figurative language. So the point of view is what we will look at first. Point of view. When you think of a point of view, you're looking at a viewpoint. Sounds redundant, yes. Or you're looking at the way something is viewed from a particular angle. So it's a perspective from which the story is relayed or told. Who is telling the story and from what viewpoint? So, of course, there are three major types that are used in prose fiction. There's a first-person point of view, there's a third-person limited point of view, and there's a third-person omniscient point of view. Depending on where you look, you'll also hear of the second-person point of view, but this is more common in poetry than in prose. So let's take a deeper look at the first-person point of view. One thing you need to know, the narrator is a character in the story. So someone in the story is telling the story to you. So think already of the stories like that you've read or are about to read, where the narrator is the one who is in the story. The next thing you need to remember, the pronouns I and me will be used most often. So I will do this, I got up, I stretched, I walked out the door, he hit me, she hit me, that sort of thing. So your narrator is going to be in the story, telling you the story from his or her perspective. Now, this focuses on the narrator's inner thoughts, feelings, and experiences. So whatever story you're reading and you have a first-person narrator, then that is the person who you're connecting with most. That is the person who you're hearing about most. That is the person who you're seeing most. And because of that, guess what? You, the reader, become personally invested in the story. So it is almost as if you, the reader, are in the story with this person, because you're reading I this, I that, me this, me that. So you become the I, you become the me. So you, the reader, are actually in the story, taking part in the story. You win when the narrator wins, you lose when the narrator loses. So, of course, you must have some disadvantages with this type of narrative point of view. So, one disadvantage, unfortunately, and you can understand why this would be a disadvantage, there's a potential for bias. Because if I am telling the story, then I'm not going to tell the ugly parts that make me look bad. I'm going to make myself look like the hero when in fact I am the villain. So you might not get the full story from a first-person narrator. You'll get the story that makes them look good, that makes them come off as the victim if there is someone to be victimized or that sort of thing. The next thing is that the reader's knowledge, of course, is going to be limited to what this narrator knows. So you can't know about another character unless your narrator knows about the character. So your first-person narrator can't really tell you anything about all the other characters. They can only tell you about the characters maybe they're close to. And even then, how deep is their knowledge of that character? So you reading on might come across a character you would want to know some more about, but unfortunately your narrator is not interacting with that character. So you don't hear anything more about Susie Brown because the narrator and Susie Brown are not friends, and the narrator has not told you why them and Susie Brown are not friends. So you have to be there, so why are you and Susie Brown not friends? And the story ends and you still don't know. The next thing is that there is potential for authorial intrusion. What this means, there are times in stories when the author's personal feelings come through, the author's personal experiences come through. If you think about the stories on your prescribed list, several of them are told from the perspective of children. None of your authors were children when they wrote them. So what you have to do in this case, look at it critically. As the story is presented to you, is it really authentic, childlike expression coming through, or is it just an adult like myself pretending to be a child? So you can have those instances where the voice of the author comes out through the writing, sometimes intentionally, sometimes unintentionally, or the author tries to, put you in a little corner, try to steer you away from something. So there is that potential with this type of narrative point of view. So here are a list of stories. Here is the list of stories that have this perspective. So we have Emma by Caroline Cole. There's Mom Luby and the Social Worker by Kristen Hunter. There's The Day the World Almost Came to an End by Pearl Creighton. And there's The Two Grandmothers by Olive Sr., as well as To Dadu in Memoriam by Paul Marshall. So for each of these stories, it is told from the perspective of a character in the story. So we have a first-person narrator for each of those. Now we're moving into the third person, limited. Remember we said there is limited and there is omniscient. Limited, the story is not told by a character in the story. It is told by an onlooker. I'll have that in quotation marks because that is the easiest way to describe it. Someone looking on and relating the story to you. So this now will focus mainly on the main character. Of course, they're going to tell you about other characters, but the primary focus is the main character. His or her struggles, his or her dreams, his or her triumphs, that sort of thing. And of course now, it presents a supposedly neutral perspective. So unlike the first person where you have to question if this person is biased or not because I am telling this story and in this story I tell you that I have been wronged, but I did not necessarily tell you why I was wronged or how it is that I believe I am wronged. So that case, you could question me, say, I don't believe you because you're only telling me your side. With a third person narration, it would seem as if you're getting an unbiased perspective. But then again, you have to keep in mind, the author, him or herself, might be biased. So you have to question that too. Is it that the author wants me to take the side of this character? Is it that the author wants me to cheer for this character and curse the other one? You never can quite tell. So of course, it has some drawbacks. First one, the reader is distanced from the characters. So unlike the first person narration where you're involved in it, you're part of the struggles going on, for this one, again, you're a neutral bystander looking on. So you're not really physically or mentally involved in the action. You're just reading about someone else. Again, just like with the previous one, your knowledge is somewhat limited too, because what the main character is doing is what will be focused on. So you will have to be reading about the main character mostly. And there might be, again, other characters you might be interested in, but they are not the focus of the story, so their stories get untold. And then, again, there is potential for bias, because your author might implicitly, meaning subtly under the quiet, or explicitly, brawling with it, reveal his or her opinions. And this would be done to achieve sympathy for a particular character. So the author wants you to feel a certain type of way about one of the characters. So they might try and sneak in some little words in there to get your sympathy, or they might just outright tell you to be sympathetic towards this person. All right, so now, these are the stories that have this type of narration. So there's Blood Brothers by John Wickham, and we remember all about that with Paul. And we have The Man of the House by Frank O'Connor. Now, we're going to look at third person omniscient. So we did limited, and limited was limited for a reason. It only focused on one person. So when you think of omniscient, those of you who are good little Sunday and Sabbath school attendees, you would have heard the term omniscient already. So you know it's all-knowing, all-seeing. So this type of narrator is basically everywhere and with everyone. So the focus is still on a main character, yes. However, you do still get different perspectives. You do still get to hear what character X is thinking. You get to hear what character Y is thinking. You get to hear people wondering what's going to happen next. So yes, you're still focusing on the main character and their trials and struggles because you have a protagonist, but you might also get to hear from the antagonist's point of view as well. But of course, there are drawbacks, unfortunately. So one drawback, again, you're distanced, and even more so, because now you can't even connect with any one character. You're being given perspectives of several characters. So you have to try and be the neutral bystander in this case and try not to pick a side until the very end if possible. Again, your narrator might be the voice of the author trying to sway you left or right. So your author might just be trying to sway your mind and lead you down a certain path that you shouldn't be. So the stories with this type of narration, we have Berry by Langston Hughes. Remember, in Berry, we did not just get Berry's perspective throughout the entire story. At a few points, we heard from Mrs. Osborne when she went in search of Dr. Renfield. We got her little obsession with him in her mind, her little love affair that doesn't exist. In Blackout, we got the perspectives of both characters. We got the young lady in the beginning, and then it switched to the young man, and then there was a nice interchange between both of them. In The Boy Who Loved Ice Cream, we had Benji, the little boy, who loves ice cream that he's never tasted before, the most ironic of ironies. And we also get the perspective of his father. So we hear from Benji, who is obsessed with ice cream, and we hear from Benji's father, who is obsessed with the idea that his wife is giving him bun. So now, the next feature, use of dialogue. What does dialogue do? So dialogue adds a sense of realism. You're reading a story, and if you're just reading the story from the narrator's point of view, the narrator just telling you everything that's happening, after a while, it doesn't sound as engaging as it could be. So the dialogue adds a little flavor to it. Dialogue adds a little sense of reality to it. You're hearing people talking. Of course, dialogue is one of the ways to achieve characterization. So you learn about the characters through their speech. So what they talk about, who they talk to, who they talk about, what is said about them, all of those things can come out through dialogue, and all of those can contribute to characterization. Now, dialogue can also introduce or develop the conflict. So the dialogue can tell you, through two characters talking, we can hear what the problem is that they're going to face. Or through two characters talking, we hear how the problem is building and building and building. Of course, the dialogue can also advance the plot. So your characters can talk to each other and tell you what they're going to do next, which in essence is what will happen next in the story. So you can use the dialogue to do that. And keep this in mind for even in English too, when you're doing your story writing, utilize dialogue for these things. It will work for you. The next thing, it can enhance the mood or the tone. So what the characters are talking about and how they talk about it can somehow set up the mood or the tone. So when you think of a situation where a character is feeling sad, then them talking to themselves or to another character about their sadness is telling us that, yes, this is a sad mood that is going on right here. There's a sad tone going on right here. So the dialogue can assist with that. Use of time. Now, we're all told, time waits on no man. But guess what? Time waits on an author because he is the master of time in the piece of writing. So the first thing you need to know is that time can be used through flashback or through foreshadowing. So we're going to look at those in a little more detail. So we're going to start with flashback. So flashback, a transition or a break in the story's line that explores an earlier event. So naturally, the story is going like this, chronological order. But at different points in the story, your author may choose to go back in time, give you another scene, and explain something. And the scene that they bring up is going to be somehow significant to the actual timeline that is going on. So keep in mind, you're not just going back in time because you feel like it. You're going back in time to perform a particular function, to achieve a particular goal. There is a reason why they're going back in time. And these are the reasons. So to provide the backstory. So when you think about it, a story like The Boy Who Loved Ice Cream, it starts with the family heading off to the fair. But before they actually get to the fair, we have a few flashback episodes. So we learn about why the story name The Boy Who Loved Ice Cream, because we learn about Benji being introduced to the idea of ice cream by his sister when she went to a previous fair. We learn why it is that he's still longing to taste ice cream at this point, because 2 fairs have passed. He didn't get to go to one because he was sick, and the other one because he couldn't go. So we learn now why it is this boy loves ice cream that he's never had before, which is still something that is a mystery to everybody who reads this story. So we get the backstory that way. The next thing that it does, it contextualizes the present events. So in that same story, think about it. When we get the backstory as to why the story is called The Boy Who Loves Ice Cream, how it is that Benji loves ice cream, but he's never tasted it, we understand his urgency, his desire, his longing, his nervousness over getting to taste the ice cream at this particular fair. So here are the stories that use flashback. So we have Blood Brothers. Remember, in the beginning, it starts at the present day. But then we're taken back to an event that has scarred Paul for life, apparently, because he can't stop thinking about it. So when he was walking in the night with his father and his brother, and the trees were there, and he was so frightened by the sounds and the sight of the trees looking like ghosts, the shadows looking like ghosts, and all of that. So that flashback sets up a certain type of mood, a certain type of tone, and also leads us to say that Paul is a real old coward. We talked about the boy who liked ice cream already, loved ice cream. I keep saying liked, sorry. The boy who loved ice cream and his issues. Think of the day the world came to an end. That one, the entire story actually is a flashback, because it is actually the narrator who is now grown, who has gone back in time to tell us about this particular incident that has more or less impacted on her from then till present day. And something similar happens in To Dadu in Memoriam, because it is the adult who has gone back in time to tell us the story of when she was a child from her childlike perspective as well. So I wouldn't say the opposite, but the flip side of flashback, foreshadowing. So flashback goes back in time. Foreshadowing actually makes a prediction or hints at something. So it teases you. So it gives you a reason to say, wait, what's going to happen next? So it gives you a little hint of something that makes you wonder, makes you question, makes you actually continue reading to solve the mystery that it presents. So when you think of foreshadowing, you're looking at incidents probably that will speak to something down the line. So something is happening now that is hinting at the possibility of something happening down the line. So of course, if that is what it does, then the function naturally is to create some kind of tension, create some type of yearning, somehow to enhance your desire to read, because now you want to know, why did this happen? Is it that this is foreshadowing that? Because one event is basically an omen that something else is coming. So somebody breaks a favorite glass, yes, that means something bad coming along the way down the line. Somebody is very worried about something. They need to go somewhere, but they're worried. Maybe it's foreshadowing that something bad is going to happen to either them or somebody else there. We don't know yet. We have to read the whole thing to solve the mystery. So here are stories that employ it. So in Blackout, we have a little foreshadowing. So the whole idea that it starts with a blackout. It starts with no light, complete darkness. They give us the news about all kinds of crimes taking place. So right then and there, in your mind, you're supposed to be thinking, what is going to happen to this woman on the road all by herself in a blackout? Something is possibly going to happen. In Blood Brothers, we can look at the whole idea of how it started out. It told us how oppressed Paul felt, how the heat was just killing him. So right there, that type of natural expression is kind of leading you to wonder, then why you started with such a graphic picture? This boy, the heat is killing him, the house stifling him. Something bad is coming later on in this day. In Emma, we have quite a few instances of foreshadowing as well, because in Emma, we have these two little girls who are so taken up with one of the little girl's mother, but we miss the point where the other little girl's mother says to them, if I were your mother, I would pack you off to boarding school. And what does she do at the very end? Send them right off to boarding school. The day the world almost came to an end, we start off with a natural occurrence that is about to take place. We're about to have an eclipse. And right then and there, for those who are spiritual, the eclipse is foreshadowing the end of the world. But it's not just that for this little girl. She is confused about if it's really going to be the end of the world. So it's not that the world ends in the story, but we do know that something bad will happen because this little girl is so preoccupied by thoughts of impending doom and gloom. And when we think of the boy who loved ice cream, think of how nervous, how anxious Benji is about getting ice cream. They always tell you, say, you mustn't want something too badly because something bad is going to happen. That is what happens in Benji's case. And then in Tudadu in Memoriam, the foreshadowing is not so much that the planes foreshadowed that Dadu would die. The whole idea is that she went into this depression long before her death, weeks before. So the depression that she felt, the negative feelings that she was having, her loss of spirit, her granddaughter says that she lost that gleam in her eye, that would foreshadow that her end would be coming. So we're going to look at figurative language now. So this, of course, is a use of words from a deviation from the conventional. So you don't use the words the way regular people would use it. The writers use the words and create something new with it. So they want to convey a certain complicated feeling, a certain impression. So instead of just saying the boy walked slowly, they're going to say he dragged his carcass to the door. That is telling you many things about this boy. For one, if you describe him as a carcass, that means that he is basically not having any vim and vigor. He is not happy, perhaps. Perhaps he's sad. Perhaps he's very melodramatic and feel like, Lord, me are dead. So the use of the word carcass in that sense, that description, that comparison of the boy to a carcass, conveys a certain picture in your mind about him. So here are the steps that you would use to comment on figurative language. So first thing you need to do, of course, clearly state the name of the device or the technique that you're going to discuss. So you can't be discussing a metaphor, simile, imagery, or whatever it is, and you don't say that that's what you're discussing. You have to name it. You have to call it by its name. The next thing, give the examples. So you have said you're going to talk about X device or X literary expression, X technique. Give some examples, because you can't say you're talking about a metaphor and all know not one metaphor not in your essay. So you need to give some examples, some meaningful ones preferably. So some examples that actually connect with what you're trying to say. Then of course you have to give a surface explanation. So you give just the top layer of the explanation. So the boy dragged his carcass to the door. You're going to say the boy walked slowly to the door. That is the surface. But of course, you can't just stay on the surface, because this is literature. You're supposed to dig. And again, I said it before. Miss, how you know say it mean this? We don't know for sure, but we can do what? Make an educated guess. So by the use of the word carcass, you can say that it is trying to convey how the intensity of how he feels. It is trying to emphasize how lacking in energy he is, that sort of thing. So you need to go below the surface and bring that out. So for the next step now, you need to make a judgment in the use of the device. So first question you have to answer, to what extent is the device used appropriately? So the boy dragged his carcass to the door. What makes it appropriate or inappropriate? Is it appropriate because prior to this you had read that he was very tired, he was very discouraged, that sort of thing, so you know his emotions which cause him to be dragging his body like that? Or is it inappropriate because it never that bad, it's just a little grading get that wasn't so nice, or maybe him just dropped something, so it didn't need this over dramatization. So you need to talk about to what extent is it appropriate or not, because you can say it's inappropriate as well. Don't feel like you have to agree. Then of course, to what extent is it used effectively? So is this a device that is used to make the point clear? You want to make sure the point is very clear. You want to make sure that you are understanding and the understanding is being conveyed clearly. And the next thing now, what has the use of the device or the technique contributed to the text? So you explained what it means on the surface and below the surface. You have given us some insight into it. You said how appropriate it is, how effective it is, but you also need to say, wait do for the book, wait do for the story. It not just dead upon the page, it was put there for a reason. What is that reason? So we're going to look at an example now of applying narrative technique to figurative language. So we're looking at imagery. And imagery is one of those techniques that you can get it wrong if you're not careful. So you need to remember what imagery is. So when you use imagery, it's basically a collection of images. So you're using them together to create an overall impression. So it's like you have few different frames, and you have a big picture. So those of you who do art and you do your little mosaic, you have the little bits and pieces that you put together, and then you step back and you see a beautiful creation. Similar to imagery. So you have different images that come together for an overall impression. And of course, because it appeals to the senses, you have a type of imagery for every type of sense. So you have the visual. That should be obvious what the visual appeals to. What you can see. So you're looking at things that are described in front of you, things you can see. So you're thinking of things like color, size, shape. You're thinking of objects being described, light and dark, shadow, shade, that sort of thing. The next one is oral. And this applies to how things sound, because you hear things too when you read. There are certain devices that lend themselves to hearing. So you hear things about pitch and frequency, probably intensity, loudness, and all of that. Those are the most obvious types. But then you also have your sound devices, your onomatopoeia, your alliteration, your assonance. Those are things you hear. And there they are. So they create the sound in the writing. You have olfactory images. Now, for those of you who don't know that one, it's what you can smell. So you're reading about things that you can smell. So perhaps there is a pungent aroma of some food cooking, or perhaps a distasteful odor of garbage rotting. All of those are olfactory images. So remember now, we talked about the difference between connotation and denotation, and this is where it comes into play. Because when you hear the word aroma, you think of something pleasant. But when you hear the word odor, your default is something that smells not so nice. Of course, you have to have tactile images. You have to have things you can feel, things you can touch. And for this, you're thinking of textures, you're thinking of temperatures, you're thinking of even resistance as well. So you're thinking of things that you can experience through your skin. So again, going back to Blood Brothers, when Paul, in the beginning of the story, was feeling the heat, that was a tactile image right there. He felt this heat, and because of how it was described, you might have felt the heat as well. Now, your gustatory images are things that you can taste. So reference is made to different taste sensations, your sweet, your sour. I learned this one recently, umami, so that's savory. So these tastes are explored in the writing. So your writers will tell you about, maybe in Benji's case, with the ice cream, when his sister was trying to describe the taste of ice cream to him, you were probably in your mind trying to visualize that taste as well. So those are different types of gustatory images. And you can also use textures to bring it across as well. Kinesthetic now has to do with movement. So you're going to hear about things moving. So words like sway, words like ran, those sort of movement words. Now the difference is kinesthetic can overlap with tactile sometimes. It can overlap with visual sometimes. But keep in mind that it specifically has to do with movement. So there we have it. So it can be mistaken, but try and keep it clear. Once it has to do with movement, keep in mind that it's kinesthetic as well. So here are some examples: rushing water, flapping wings, pounding hearts. These are things that are moving. These are sensations. So let's look at imagery in Blood Brothers now. So we have some tactile images, and we have the metaphors that are used to foreshadow. So again, you remember me mentioning this earlier about the sun and the heat from the sun. So there it is right there. And the next example, the air was still and it shimmered in the noonday heat. So that's comparing the hot air to perhaps hot metal. If you've ever lived anywhere where there are zinc roofs and you see the heat, the haze on top of it. So that's the type of idea it's conjuring up. So you can feel that heat. Then you have the oral images now. So we have the alliteration and the personification being used within a flashback. So you see how everything ties up. So we have the imagery, we have the figurative devices and techniques within the imagery, and we have the narrative technique all tied up in one cute bow. So you're looking at the casuarinas swaying, and they're speaking in sibilant whispers. Right there you're hearing the what animal goes? So the danger right there. So they're whispering ever so languidly, like lovely ladies in pictures. So you need to read these things out loud, and put like a oomph in there so you get the overall impression. So the wind was whispering thinly through the trees, ghostly voices of the trees. So you're getting the sounds coming out. And these sounds and movements are being described through the oral imagery. Then you have the visual, which is the easiest one to spot. So we have the metaphors being used there. So the spectral light of the moon. A spectre is a ghost. So the moon is being compared to a ghost. The light it casts is ghost-like and eerie and creepy. Remember, say Paul's headspace, not so level. All right. And then the wraith-like shadows of the trees. Again, the whole idea of everything to him in that moment looking very spooky, very evil, perhaps very sinister. So this is how you can possibly come up with some interpretation. So the tactile images basically telling you how hot it was, literally telling you how hot it was. And then the oral images now add to the whole atmosphere of fear, because all of those sounds were there to stir up a little emotion inside of you, because Paul is there experiencing all these things and fear will kill him. And then what does it do? It contributes to the mood and the tone. So all those oral images would have created a mood of fear, a tone of fear, the whole idea of the experience being very traumatic for him. Of course, it contributes to the theme of fear as well. So remember we said everything kind of overlaps, interchanges, they're all nicely interconnected. So do not think of narrative technique is over here, devices are over here, imagery is over here. My dear, it's like a nice pot of soup. Everything comes together, it boils down, it simmers down, and then you just eat it up. So it contributes to plot as well, because we learn now why it is that he feels the way he does about his brother, unfortunately. So remember, when you're looking at narrative technique, when you're looking at figurative language, when you're looking at anything to do with the tone, the mood, and all of that, you have to think of them as how do they impact on each other. So you're not looking at them in isolation, all right? So keep that in mind.